So I think we start some questions. Start.
So the first question is it appropriate to try and find out what happened in our past lives? Of course, it's appropriate to do that kind of research, but maybe it's difficult to know what your past life was.
Basically, one Tibetan Lama, he expressed what previous life done, look, the present, your life, human being. And also is some also the interest about spirituality and external, internal facilities already there. These, without cause, will never happen. Therefore, the devil tene to pop.
So
broadly speaking.
So broadly speaking, by looking at the kind of effect or the result that we see, we can infer what we have done in the past, the actions or the causes.
So then next sentence, in the future, where we going? Again, you should check our present behavior. So that's the 남의 강제 다들 룰을 침묵 간주 다들 섬을
So this saying goes that what you have done, if you want to know what you have done in the past, just look at your own life, how it is now. And if you wish to know what's going to be your future, you have to check what actions you are actually committing.
Action and your own mental state. So those people who are materially very successful, but always too much selfish way of thinking and making money, that. Then money at the time of death, no use. And also money, not very sure whether bring peace of mind or compassionate mind. Money brings more greed, more sense of competition, more jealousy. And through jealousy, more distrust, more suspicion. This very life then becomes something uncomfortable life. Like that. So, whether we believe next life or not, this life should be meaningful life. Like that. Next question.
Yes. Your Holiness, you mentioned positive actions bring positive results and negative actions bring negative results only. If so, how come a thief is happy with? If so, the how come a thief is happy with the money he stole? The action is negative, but the result is positive.
I think whether this morning I mentioned or not, positive, something long-term benefit. That means some action, temporarily not necessarily comfortable. For example, as I mentioned earlier, those Christian monks, nuns, and people who remain solitude. For immediate, they may not have very comfortable life, but long run, they feel deep sort of satisfaction and no harm to other. And then, as you mentioned, thief or alcohol. One time, one of my Tibetan government official, I think since he became official, I think in 1950s. Then we also came to India as a refugee, 1959. So then, I think early 70, I met. Then he got liver. Since I know him, I told him, this problem, your own creation. Too much drink. So drink wine. I think those people, out of illusion, more expensive wine or alcohol, you feel proud. Oh, I drank very high price.
No.
What use? So immediately you get some kind of satisfaction, happy, and also show off other people. But long run, as they ruined your own sort of health, like that. So then thief. I think thief, unless foolish thief, otherwise once you stole something, he or she always busy to hide that. So how can be happy person? Very difficult. Like that.
What is the difference between Atman and that goes from life to life and the very subtle mind that goes from life to life?
Karsa.
Atma da subtle mind ni parula.
How karsa?
Atma se ti gatsi dire.
Atma ho.
La Atma da tanji kondo sem chamu chisim chamu da chisim chamu kewan gyun jo so ni parul keba kari nas. Niga kewan.
I think the concept of Atma, as I mentioned this morning, something separate entity, not related with mind. Of course, not completely sort of separate, but you see, its own identity,
No.
we can identify Atma, separate from mind. Since Buddhist, you see, the Atma or self, simply designated on the combination of mind and body. Then out of these, the mind is major factor, the basis of self. So continuation of mind is the basis of self. So there are some sort of, because of further sort of investigation about mind, some different level. And then also the Arahat and ordinary people, and also Buddha and ordinary or Arahat. Differentiation. The differences not on body, but mental quality. So mind more important. And after all, spirituality is the quality of a mind, as well as emotions, also quality of a mind, like that. So, more sort of explanation about mind. Actually, the all spirituality, I always mentioning or telling, the Buddhist way of practice is use human intelligence maximum way, through that way transform our emotion. So the method, also mind. The object which we purify, that also mind. Then finally, Buddhahood, also you see, very much related with mind. The Buddha's body is because
so the nature of the Buddha's body is also mental, because of being in the nature of Dharmakaya, the wisdom body of the Buddha.
Janakaya.
The Janakaya within the Dharmakaya.
Dharmakaya dimension yorba. Oh, like that. So mind is umajuga nalaya simmi kini semjen jikden tang nuji jikden shi na so ko drama le lele ke war song samba nani ka la jang yema yin sa dinle ko ne do sa chue na kam sum budin samjam mo so shati.
So in Master Chandrakirti's entering into the middle way, Madhyamaka Avatara, it's said that the mind itself gives rise to the world of sentient beings, as well as the world of the external world where they live in, and therefore all sentient beings are the product, or they come from karma. They are produced by karma, and therefore apart from the mind, there is no way to create a karma. And so this also it is also mentioned in the Bodhisattva 10 grounds of Bodhisattva Sutra, that all the three planes of existence are mere mind.
What is the exact time? Time? So this is a little faster. Okay. If you really hurry, then this is good, more faster. Sorry. Okay. I think now I start the lecture. Now, Four Noble Truth is basis of all Buddhist tradition, as I mentioned this morning. Then, also you see everybody, all Buddhists, you see, except Trajomba and Tishinshepa.
So all these different traditions except arhats, the beings who have become liberated from samsara, and also tathagatas, the Buddhas.
Arhata mangu yung duduwa. Sanje shomdende kaso bege chik damba chik sanje chik moto ya ka sorji.
So within
tenjing ni min sanje shin zena.
And so within one Buddhist tradition, or the tradition that we have, like for example now, there could be many arhats, people who are liberated from samsara, who have overcome all the delusions. But then within the context of one teaching of Buddha, there could be only one founding teacher, the founder teacher, as it is mentioned in Abhidhammas.
Buddha.
Now, The Buddha within one teaching of the Buddha, and so it is even mentioned in also mentioned in Master Vajubandhu's Abhidhammakosha.
Then Abhidhammakosha Karika, you see, he also mentioned Kangshi Kunla Mumba Ten Chomsing Srizane 가사주고지. 다 배지 녀무쟁이 머리보다 녀무쟁이 입은 머리고 사지 배지 동용이요.
So Master Vajubandhu refers to the Buddha as someone who has overcome all the darkness of all delusions or afflictive emotions. So within this, with regard to the afflictive emotions, of course, there may be those afflictive emotions which are the darkness here refers to either the affective emotions or the negative defilements, which are not afflictive emotions as such.
So the question, what is Buddha's nirodha or cessation and the Arahata's cessation? What are the differences? 다좀be 빵바다 산중들이 빵바를 캐가야.
No. So the question is, what is the difference between the state of having overcome all the negativities within by the Buddha and having overcome the negativities, the state of having overcome all these negativities by the Arhats?
So Nagarjuna 가서 리고 주주비 리고 주주비 나래야 아니 창조 소등 람 찍버치 곰니 찍 다시 몇 고방 문드샤 찍이 산지 고방 토야디 두 면접 매딩의 찍이 두 면접 영향을 컨디션 그래서.
And so Master Nagarjuna raises this question, how can the result, one becoming an arhat and other one becoming a Buddha, a fully enlightened one, be different? How can there be two different results from having practiced the same system, paths, which are comprised in the 37 factors of enlightenment?
It's the same method, same process, naturally produce same result. So there is differences of result level. Buddha's sort of the enlightenment, Arahata's enlightenment. There are differences. So there must be differences of in the course because of the practice. So then, yes, the practice, the emphasis about infinite altruism. Yes, that's true. But altruism, not kind of wisdom, is warm-heartedness. So the antidote of ignorance, as I mentioned this morning, must be wisdom.
So antidote to all these negativities and ignorance and so forth must be the development of wisdom.
So that delivery,
and therefore we come across the teachings on selflessnesses, the two different kinds of selflessnesses, selflessness of persons and selflessness of the phenomena.
그래서 강사가 담에기 코에 싸워치기 등지기 머리부터 강사가 등지기 머리부터 님부치기요체. 등 오늘 땅을 두실을 믿어야죠. 강사 강을 때는 딱 왜 풍수를 강사 라디오트에 제일 동통을 로티 태가를 지금 풍부된 그 담이 지금 믹스에 상목하시면 도와. 그러다 시루는 강사 담이 비켜졌어 그러다 그래다 뭐도 저 상무 담이 보이나 강사 풍부sem네 샤샤의 강사지 rāngi tupi saiji tōng rēs. Tā tīndrīgi tōng tōng lō tīgi tāgar phūngbu chik dādun zimbir lō lī ya. Phūngbu tīngzū zimbir lō lī ya, kō kandis nīgu duwa.
So here we can say that raise this question. First of all, the root of samsara, according to Buddhism, is said to be the clinging to this self of a person. And so the antidote to this self, clinging to a self, on Atman, is the understanding of selflessness of persons. But on the other hand, there are also views where it's said that there is this misconception of a self, which is called the conception of a self-sufficiently existing substantial self. And so the antidote to that, of course, we can say that the understanding of the lack of that kind of self, self-sufficiently, substantially existent self, the lack of that may be an antidote to this clinging to the self of a person. We may say that, but how can it actually become an antidote as such against the antidote to this kind of self clinging to the self as such, because here when you meditate on the selflessness in terms of the selflessness of a substantially existing called self-sufficient person, maybe you can say that kind of self is not findable from within the psychophysical aggregates as such. But then that meditation on the lack of that kind of self doesn't actually go against the deeper root of that kind of clinging to a self, which is the clinging to or misconceiving a truly existent self.
디 르버디 더더지 자토르다 가사 렁지 지부 주네 통신도 내는 랑점이 타오세디 가사 아니 뒤지고 뽕쳐와는 게마시키 나버려 교인이 도스 소샤티 주요를 삼 지gn하게 되때 델랑지 영어스로셔베 백문도가 대 주요를 삼 천댕에 지버드세알 때 주 매와 타초시 상호로 봐 자상가 풍소 지들 나오는 시 담버 따댕에 로텔라 가서 이제 집에 자유 야마르스로셔베 배마송.
And so here Master Chandakirti in his Madhyamaka Avatara again says that if you
커도디 슝디들이 가서 군다 등진 시행 거로다 무디고 떠지라고 다지.
And so and
this is
and so with regard to this clinging to a self, independent self, and these clinging to a self-sufficiently, substantially existent self, to make the difference between these two, Master Chandakirti says that how can actually he gives these images of the snake and elephant. How can you actually get rid of the fear that you have about about a snake by saying that there is no elephant here? So it's conception or called seeing an elephant and seeing the absence of elephant and the absence of snake. Will not be seeing the absence of an elephant will not get rid of your fear of snake. And likewise, he says that. So accordingly, here with regard to these two misconceptions, one which is the self-sufficient, clinging to a self-sufficiently substantially existent self. Of course, when you see the lack of that kind of self, this will not get rid of the deeper sort of clinging to a self, which is this clinging where you kind of conceive of a self which is independent of or not dependent on any kind of psychophysical aggregates.
Then Nagarjuna also mentioned not very clear. I myself not very sure. Some text mentioned that the sort of same 창조소등을 남건 말에 장미순 초사네 따로 차시하나 가사 년도를 뉴어시고 숨기 타르스 세숨이야 자주는 그거 쳐야 다 스루데브 랑산제를 스루게바 자이규스 봐 다데네 산제 좀 된데 장미순 초사 아니 찬나버 미지til에 개바 자이 받았어 독생도 되도록 다 디디ring이야 남고야데 창조 소든 섬이 있나 아니 귤을 캐버면은 튀ring도 짱게 아니 대부상에 들어서 용돼야 돼 배서 가고 그러다 아니 니네 장외송 그 초사네 대부디 좀 된데 고는 주저고도 네 가서 김르쇼 내내 김하고 로드충 로드까지인데 전이 상제도 고는 거절해 뭐 숨상을 왜 자상가 다 숨상안에 되게 잘하는지 보도 로그즈 심으래 숨상안에 십시행아 노중량아 조주량아 되주량아 다 로시 무슨 말씀이지 무슨 삼음이지 그래서 장면 숨지 초사고 대부 아니 롱업주 삼음이지 때 이는 때에 맞아도 두 하장 또 첨부시사 din rebuti ta champagne tuya lo di mo de mabjina di ma desh to
so in one of the texts, it's mentioned that about how some beings become arhats, and then within the Shravaka path, and then some others become arhats through the Pratyeka Buddha path, and then finally how someone becomes a Buddha. And also there is this mention of how much time someone takes to become the enlightened in these through these three different paths. And so it's mentioned that those who follow the Shravaka paths, the quickest time. In Abhidhammakosha Karika, it's mentioned that someone who follows the path of a Shravaka can become enlightened or an Arhat quickest within 3 lifetimes. And then someone who follows the path of Pratyeka Buddha Yana can become, especially those who live like a rhinoceros type, it said, living alone, they would take like 100 eons to become an Arhat in the end. And then for someone to become a Buddha, a fully enlightened one, then it takes 3 countless eons to become a Buddha. And so here it's not only the time factor that matters much, but even and also they go through the path, the 37 factors relating to enlightenment. And so if it is the case that there is these differences with the time factor, how can there be, if there is no difference in the causes, the processes that lead to the Buddhahood and Arhatship and so forth, then how can there be a huge difference between the resultant state where someone becomes a fully enlightened person and others become Arhats and in the Shravaka and Pratyeka Buddha lineage by following those paths. And it's also quite difficult to stand up to reason if you make these kind of differences. And because in the case of the Buddha, for example, until he was 29, he lived in his palace as a royal, as a princess. And then at the age of 29, he left the home and then became enlightened at the age of 35. And then after that enlightenment, he actually gave teachings to various people for the next 45 or 46 years. And so if the result of having gone through the process of becoming enlightened for over 3 countless eons were only to live 45 or 46 years and to serve others, and then become pass away. How can then the Master Nagarjuna's argument is, how can such a powerful causes that the person has actually created within himself to become enlightened give rise to a result which is so short-lived? So there is a disparity between the cause and the effect as well.
다가는 시기를 항민자한테 먼저 지도지 그 진체 등에든지 연구하래. 저라마 대화 접지 않는 거 대화 가시게 된 되게하래.
And then there are certain philosophical schools in the classical Indian philosophical schools. There were these philosophical schools which actually asserted that when after someone has become an arahat, an enlightened person, then after their death, there is nothing more left of that person at all. So in the case of the Buddha, according to these kind of philosophical schools, they say that they assert that the Buddha, the Shakyamuni Buddha, actually when he passed away in Kushinagar, since then, since his death, there is nothing more, nothing left of the Buddha. So he has therefore he has overcome what are known as the 4 evil forces, 4 maras. So until his final death at that time in Kushinagar, he was said to have not overcome all the 4 maras.
Do you think some useful, this explanation, or just causing more confusion? So my point is, now the Sanskrit tradition, much elaborate about the ultimate reality, and through that way, they pinpoint the very subtle level of ignorance. So these, then you see, you get more, satisfactory sort of explanation, convincing. Otherwise, within Buddhists, finally, Buddha said that, it must be true. Not much reason. So as I mentioned earlier, like Nagarjuna, they investigate even Buddha's own word. So now the point is, you see, then Sanskrit tradition, particularly, I think, started by Nagarjuna. Then the Kasota, ngar ta zimbe nganjing lo ta kasore kansa tangsi insaji tele ta nangse chara cheyungri the jiunggi kansa tangsi saji ta degi kansa ta meber to lo degi kansa ta to zimbetela ko mibu chiglemin zindang ngale to it ko no to ta dene ngai long jaja 사다 풍속이 최디지들 나 란제트베 제주 동통 삼식이 롱자제 풍속 쳐라 텐 아테그 좀봐 텔라 현샤로 텔라 페지 노트야 카운트 메테글레트리 자, 진리 인도자네 다 나를 짐베 강사 그 당승이 년불로 강사가 되면서 다나 강돈도 시 풍속의 최디디를 담을 짐베 댄징이 년불로 풍속의 최디디에 다음에 그래서네 다 들라 최다 강다 롱 쥐어보고 뒤 강사샤 롱 재즈디 들라 되베 최사샤네 이 최기담에서 시 that did that.
And so, with regard to this grasping at self and then the antidote to it, of course, when we talk about the selflessness of persons, there may be different understandings, different degrees of interpretations and understandings within this selflessness of person, or grasping at some kind of a self within ourselves. And now here, of course, when you talk about clinging to a self and then overcoming it with the understanding or wisdom of selflessness, how do they actually go against each other is such that when you cling to a self, you cling to some entity which is apart from the body and the mind, and then because of this clinging to a self, what you need to overcome this clinging is to have this understanding that there is no such a self, no self which is independent from body and the mind as such. And so with that understanding, of course, you can, that may be an antidote, that will become an antidote to this self, clinging to the self. But then, although that is true, then when you again talk about clinging to the psychophysical aggregates, which actually are the basis for the designation of a person, I mean that kind of clinging to a psychophysical aggregates, I mean, will not be overcome through the mere the lack of substantially existent self, as mentioned earlier, and that kind of misconception cannot, understanding of the lack of that substantially existent self cannot overcome this deeper clinging to a self as such.
Now I think, related to this, the Heart Sutra, an original Sanskrit text,
So in the Heart Sutra, the original Sanskrit actually has this word in one of the passage sentences. The 5 psychophysical aggregates also are empty of intrinsic existence. And so the term also is there in the original.
Tibetan translation also you see that word there also. Now the Chinese translation, since the Chinese translation, no word that also.
So in the Chinese translation, So in the Chinese translation, you find mentioned the 5 aggregates are empty of intrinsic existence.
So since the original Chinese translation, no mention also. So therefore, Vietnamese language, as well as Japanese and Korean, all no word, they're missing the word also. Tadi 가렸으나 관이도아 직디 배지 되게 자시고 직디다 강사 땅에는 nga 딜르빈들이 콜로 당부커도라 아니 풍금 제지 취디디 송 배는 된데 야마신 수인들잖아요 시버코어로 거직서 머리고 제인이 대왕 그 중에다 지금 과외 정신들이 이니 깨가는시 다 뒤시 깨가는시 정신 쟁겠다 동네와 사지 뒤송마도 코보다서 숨는다 띵 ngabo kundu naliya ngabo khoma ngabo kundu thomi ngabo kundu naliya di duksin sunya di 풍금 지식이 최송 다 못송야 다 신고프게 죽어야지 요 말이지 그래서 강사가 다음에 실시하네 맨날 풍금 지식이 최디도 만드셔야겠네요 되지 제가 콜로 담불커돌이야 아니 풍금 지식이 최디디 랑신이 여봐다고 대대 뭐 들이 쓰는 거였어요 여봐다고 강사 써야 돼 들이 쓰는 거였어요 매대봐지 들이지다 땡도가 딱 콜로 발배 시신 도수인도 전에 부모하고 대다 짱저 송윤도 콜로 담불커돌라 부모가를 때는 딱왜 다디 랑신이 매신의 송셔봤다 대성도 마세베 콜로 발배 금들 풍소 쇼디에 아니 랑신이 뭐주의 송원이 뭐주의 신 직대 되네 꾸준히 버치려야 풍문하고 다 짱슬러도 풍문하는 때는 답에 다 랑신이 매바 정도 마세 다 강할 때는 답에 풍소장 랑신이 뭐주의 소인도 전에 다면이 잘로 돼요.
So here, the term also in Heart Sutra can be understood in two ways. Firstly, we can say that in the so all the followers of the Mahayana tradition, of course, recite the Heart Sutra. And in this Heart Sutra, there's this mention of the five aggregates also being empty of intrinsic existence. And so the term also can be understood in two ways. Firstly, it can be understood to mean what is taught in according to the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, the first sermon of the Buddha, and the Buddha seems to have indicated, or the Buddha talks about, or has taught that the five aggregates and the different constituent factors and the sources of consciousness and so forth are called the sources of suffering for us. And then he goes more elaborate into this nature of suffering, which begins with ignorance within the teaching of the 12 links of dependent origination. He teaches how our ignorance about the true nature of things causes us the suffering of birth, aging, sickness, and death. And so within this kind of, the first sermon of the Buddha, he doesn't teach explicitly on he doesn't teach about the self as such. And the reason why that is, but he touches on the different psychophysical aggregates, which are the basis of suffering, and he doesn't touch on the self as such. The reason for that is because the whole teaching is according to Master Asanga in his Abhidharma Samuccaya, and he says that the reason why the Buddha didn't mention a self, entity called self as such in the first sermon is because
that book wrote by Vasubandhu's elder brother, Arya Asanga.
No. So Arya Asanga says that the reason is because the whole teaching is given within the understanding that the disciples have the understanding of selflessness. And so within, from that perspective, the Buddha is talking about suffering because of clinging to this kind of, because of ignorance. And therefore he talks about he taught the selflessness of, he didn't teach, he taught about the selflessness of persons as the basis of as the basis of his teaching, the first sermon. And and so from this, of course, what the disciples get idea is that there is no, there is some kind of a notion of a self, which is self-sufficient or objectively existing self and is there. And then during the...
So all other tradition is a very much sort of emphasis soul, Atma. So Buddha never mentioned about that. The soul sort of basis, he mentioned these things.
And then during the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, the second sermon of the Buddha, which is called the Teaching of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, now here not only does the Buddha touch on the self, but then he also, and the lack of that self, but he also talks about how a person, the aggregates, the body and the mind, these constituent factors, which on the basis of which you label a self, how that is also empty of any intrinsic identity, independent objective identity as such. And so, that's one way of understanding the connotation of the term also. And then secondly, we can also understand that when the Buddha was using this term, when you come across this term also in the Heart Sutra, what one should understand is that not only the person is empty or absent of any intrinsic existence, inherent existence, but also the psychophysical aggregates on the basis of which the person is designated or labeled, those are also empty of any an intrinsic existence.
So now here, the understanding which not only no longer independent self, but also the very basis of the designation of the self also does not exist by independently.
And therefore, this understanding, from this, what we understand is that there is antidote to both the clinging to an independently existing person or self, and the clinging to the an independently existing phenomena.
강사스러도 소소하니로다. 다디간레고도. 대 랑심매바 녜데베 로디기 강사 랑생이 주번 짐베 로텔라 그 진단 계획관에 권내통해지. 다 풍속의 뒤에 최슬러도 롱자제 최슬러도 타야버시도가. 자장가다 강사가 다도 짐베 머리버스는 또 충도가. 최를 다도 짐베 머리버스는 시작자체도.
So when you think about a person, a concept, or a person or being, of course you can think about yourself as well. And therefore, when you say that this person or the self does not exist independently, that kind of understanding and your insight also serves as an antidote, or helps to understand how yourself as a person does not exist independently, objectively, and then when you think about the phenomena referred earlier in reference to the five psychophysical aggregates, and the phenomena as such is very broad, almost like infinite, and so because of that, now when you think about the selflessness of a person, of course this can help the ignorance which is hanging or clinging to an independently existing self. But then that will not go against the clinging to the independent existing phenomena as such.
Oh yeah. So that the tegisagi, kanshikun member tenjumshi sagi, that nyumujing maripo, nyumujing maimbe maripo, that kansa tamen some combe, nyumujing maimbe, kasa maripo nyambusadi, that's kaudoa. That go chui damiti can leodo. That deshin do 되기 시작하기. 사실 저는 그 상제는 뒤시 맞다 말이에요. 사실 뒤시니 가서 저거들 풍불 하면 봐 상제에 내걸다 뒤시 점벌을 때네 리그 균체버렸어요. 다 뒤시도 되기 시작하기 리그 내가 용인도 전에 이 변한다 다 변하로지 가서 어비사마야 알랑가라 먼저 제나리아 구시남샤 토용도가 다디 시징기 슝나로 구시남샤도 세우슈저래 개부슈저래 지도자네 점된데 루주나리 여도부터 초고주고레스 디 주시 롱주도가 고야레스 디니우디 샨도 수구사들이 샨도 수구샤야디 랑도 이시추유구사들의 샤레스 이시추유구사 디용야디 심人心기 넘버 타과 심 단동 어다 데비네고라 심 단동디 심지신이디 뭐니고 샤베리 어다 구신 남샤디 이니 직도 상무스담베이나 직 로레야 이니 데셰디 차상시 로 직로르 샤데우스도가.
And so, as referred to in earlier in this quotation from Abhidhamma Kosha Karika by Vasubandhu, where he says that there is someone who has completely overcome or destroyed or the darkness completely. They're referring to the Buddha. Here, what we can understand is this darkness refers, of course, can be understood in terms of the afflictive emotions and those which are not defilements, which are not afflictive emotions as such, and therefore, just by understanding the selflessness of persons. Itself cannot serve as an antidote to overcome those defilements which are not afflictive emotions as such. And therefore, we also talked about the in certain schools of philosophy, philosophical schools within Buddhism, there are those who assert that after the death of the Buddha, there is nothing left of the Buddha. And so this, of course, is not tenable if you have to, logically untenable. And therefore, Master Lord Maitreya says in his Abhisamaya Alamkara, clear ornament of clear realization, he mentions the
Lord Mare Bodhisattva
the Bodhisattva Maitreya has said in his Abhisamaya Alamkara, mentioned about the 4 Buddha bodies. Now, and this is also very elaborately mentioned.
Korean resudo. So Kongin Jebanaloria, Chambongunbu, Chambasa, Santoyati, Ma Chame Puris. Jazanga Chambongulia, Yeb the Yum, Gator, Sans Yum Yudevich. Candidate Chambongulia, Yum Yusalawayana. Santadi Kandaji. Page me dancing chamberjing page yourself. Sometimes the Buddhisattva Yakshurisha. She Lord Matthias Lovina, Chuyanga today.
And so, rather than calling Maitreya Lord Maitreya, it's better to call him Bodhisattva Maitreya. Because in one of the commentaries, in a commentary to the one of the sutras called the Sutra Unraveling the Thought of the Buddha, Sandhi Nimochana Sutra, in a commentary to that sutra written by a Korean scholar.
We usually refer that as Chinese scholar. After I met some Korean, they say Wensik is Korean monk. Wensik. So his sort of commentary about that sutra, translation in Tibetan available. So I read, not very detailed way, but rough, I read. So it mentioned the name of father and mother of Maitreya.
And so the Ren6 commentary mentions about the mother because Bodhisattva Maitreya got this name Maitreya from after his mother, who was called the mother Maitreya or something like that. And so because of that, it seems the Maitreya there was a Maitreya who was a human person, a human being, and therefore we could perhaps refer to him as Bodhisattva Maitreya rather than Lord Maitreya. And so in Bodhisattva Maitreya's text, Abhisamaya Alamkara, he mentions about these 4 Buddha bodies, which are very elaborately mentioned also in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, the Panchaparamita Sutras.
4 Buddha sort of body or body, I don't know. I think the Sanskrit word kaya. Kaya means combination, chop.
So kaya means composite of.
So English word, you see the speech body difficult to understand, consciousness body also difficult. So the Sanskrit word for kaya, nirmana kaya, sambhoga kaya, jnana kaya, and dharmata kaya.
And so these 4 kayas are mentioned in these texts. And so with regard to the nirmana kaya form, for example, the nirmana kaya, in the case of, for example, Buddha Shakyamuni, we can refer to Buddha Shakyamuni was a supreme emanation body, supreme nirmana kaya, and then...
So nirmana kaya with body, the ordinary people can see. So that's nirmana kaya. Sambhoga kaya, the Buddha's form of body, but ordinary people cannot see. When they reach certain level of spiritual stage, then can see. Then these both, say, Buddha of form, both are the nature of mind, the purified mind. So that mind called Jnanakaya. Jnana means wisdom Buddha. So that wisdom possible because of emptiness. Wisdom, understand. The wisdom through understanding about the ultimate reality, then all ignorance which was distorted about the ultimate reality, then that can diminish or eliminate. So therefore, basis of all these Buddha sort of body or Buddha sort of kaya, based on Dharma kaya, like that. So that gives you, there is some point. Otherwise, you see, you have to rely on Buddha's statement. Yes, Buddha stated, must be true. Thinking these lines, investigate, and raise questions. Then, you get more clearer picture. Now further goes the possibility of 4 kayas. The Sutriyana, there are explanation, but will not get complete satisfactory sort of conviction or understanding. Only Tantrayana. In Tantrayana, the subtle mind. And as I mentioned this morning, subtle mind, subtle energy, that's body and speech. The seed, ultimate seed of body and speech and mind. So on that level, all are knowledgeable.
They are of, essentially of one same nature.
So ultimately, that is reach. Then mind reaches Buddhahood. Then from these three, energy, causing way, Buddha's body and Buddha's speech. The mind causing Buddha's mind. So right from the beginning, inseparable. Samsung Rojik said, Samsung Rojik.
And therefore, when you become a Buddha, the body, speech, and mind, which are termed as the three secrets, become of one taste.
So even before Nagarjuna come, already you see the questions, so-called Mahayana teaching is not true teaching of Buddha. So Nagarjuna try to explain the like Heart Sutra or the Pranjaparamita Sutra is true teaching of Buddha. Then the Nagarjuna, Baba Viga, I think Aryandeva also to some extent. Then the Chandrakirti, Mare, Kasa. Kasa Shola Kasa. Shandadeva. And the Baba Viga really rigorously just argue in these points. Then Tantrayana, Nagarjuna, Aryandeva, and then Chandrakirti, these well-known commentary wrote by these because of the great masters. I think the latest 11th century Atishan Dibumkara came to Tibet on the invitation of then very small kingdom in the western part of Tibet. He wrote one small text. Inside Tibet, he mentioned about Tantrayana. So these are top scholar, reliable scholar, and master, and practitioner. All these basically monk, bhikshu. So now this is the explanation of the background. So study these things, analyze these things, then you can develop some kind of idea. Oh, we can overcome all these destructive emotion. Two factor. All these emotions, all this destructive emotion based on ignorance. Ignorance of ultimate reality. That we can study. We can develop. Firstly, wisdom, knowledge through hearing. Then second level, knowledge out of contemplation and analyze. We call analytical meditation. Then third level of understanding, that's through experience. So gradually in these understanding, then becoming stronger as an antidote of ignorance. And then the basic nature of subtle mind is always pure. So there is possibility to eliminate all these negative emotions. Then very nature of mind is awareness. Because Rigpa,
awareness,
or cognitive. So that's the potential, right from the beginning there. So only obstacle remove, then the awareness automatically increase. So that's the basis of possibility of enlightenment. So then, oneself or desire or wish to enlighten. same wisdom practice and the samadhi practice, shila practice, but motivation mainly self-liberation. Now that same wisdom, in order to become antidote of all ignorance, wisdom itself not sufficient. Wisdom, you should understand it, ultimate reality itself not sufficient. Now need the backing as a shoe.
Support.
Support. That is dimba.
That's kind of aspirations or motivations.
So, the meditation of shunyata, ultimate reality, with help of altruism, infinite altruism. See, because of the way of sort of thinking, not just one single person, but a limitless sentient being. So because of that way of thinking, because of the virtues, big different. Thinking, self-liberation, wonderful, but just one person, one sentient being. The virtue from infinite altruism, because you see, thinking or concern, limitless sentient being. So naturally, you see, that mind much more sort of powerful. So it creates a lot of sort of merits. So with combination, that infinite altruism and understanding of shunyata, with help of samadhi and on the basis of shila practice, then that wisdom really becomes very, very powerful to eliminate all sort of traces of ignorance and a different variety of ignorance like that. So there's almost like introduction of this textbook. The Rinpoche, I received oral transmission of this text directly from him. Actually, this is first sort of oral transmission, or first sort of teaching from him, this text. So this text, 다 장주성 때 와서 다 장주성 다 가서 우리 캐주디 송용구야리. 당연히 시즈 아주 장주성에서 컨디션 위에 된 제시 뭐요나 다들 상상고도 야오래 송시로서도 과학임도 와네.
And so the text deals with the different qualities, the attributes of Bodichitta, this altruism, the infinite altruism. And unless you understand these qualities of Bodichitta, of course you may think, Bodichitta is a very good state of mind, where you have a very kind, great sort of kindness and so forth.
And 뭐도 얘기 들어봐. 파고들디 배지디 뭐 니나 나려야 시럽기 정주를 믹 닝지 심전을 믹스 정주 선바사 동수지도.
And so in a commentary to Abhisamaya Alamkara which was written by Arya Vimuktisena, the lamp of the 25,000 verses of Panchaparamita Sutras, he mentions that with bodhisattvas, with their wisdom, they focus on enlightenment, Buddhahood, and with their compassion, they focus on sentient beings.
Lobe singsa java tensa nariya, any munji kabatsu ma. ngoto jeng jabaman zebe lujuma ko indusane ani karsa rodun sala yigini ani rangme ba sorjane 시선 난게 임발라 인 karsa 시선 난게 임발라 인 karsa 지신다 다전 디슈데 엔 파고 공부 또 봐이 아니 넘버 저 시제 강스 대제 제법 민통네 우먼네벨은 쳇신 공기 기겐리야 배 기겐게 배 가서를 지sun 가신 조라 나요 말에 그런 게 잉니로 잉닝기 any to Koran something about to never you in the Zane, Teta Timbe, any one of the Namshan Zeva race, down one of the Nitina, Setus Namshan Zeva race, that the Mandu race. The day in the Zane, Papa Namdu de any Ume looks Chen, any terrorists. Because Papa Tredi, huh? Teja Mintone, any woman never learn on chess. So dig it that thing to her. So Gala somebody still woman, some to shame.
And so it's important to not just
파고도 날렌데 캐버전도 야고서 마시나 어다 파고도 남돌랑에 신이된 줄 하셨어요. 되냐가요. 파고도 로빈이 가르 쓰고 그래시고다 도르스를 왜 되세요? 내가도 하다. 다들 날렌데 캐버전도 한디 로 자함이 대화 요디여지. 신이된 줄 대화 맘에 봐요. 하래. 이네 디고 태바데 생긴데 리베 잡아체 싸에 가서 로빈주다 공부 시승체는 돼야지. 비데 빼 캐버리셔. 빼 남주쟁으로 다니셔.
And so one should not be satisfied with what one hears from teachers about the teachings, but one must actually reflect on them. It's important to reflect and gain certainty from your own investigation. So, I'm sorry. With regard to, for example, in the case of the Indian masters, the commentators to Abhisamaya Alamkara and the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, there is one text written by a master named Haribhadra, commentary, in his commentary to Abhisamaya Alamkara, which is called the Concise Commentary, and he goes through the lineage masters through whom these teachings on the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras have come down to him. And so he mentions first the master Vasubandhu, and he says that Vasubandhu actually explained the Panchaparamita Sutras according to his own understanding from the point of view of Chittamatran philosophical school, the
mind-only school of thought.
On the mind-only school of Buddhist philosophy, and therefore, when later Vimuktisena, Arya Vimuktisena explained the Abhisamaya Alamkara in connection with the Panchaparamita Sutras, Haribhadra mentions that Vimuktisena in his did his commentary, made his explanation not according to what his own teacher Vasubandhu had actually asserted, which is commenting explaining the Panchaparamita Sutras from the mind-only school point of view, but he actually went contrary to that, which is to say that he explained the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras and the Abhisamaya Alamkara from the point of view of the middle way school of Buddhist philosophy. And so here what you can find is, even Haribhadra mentions that what the Vimuktisena, Arya Vimuktisena actually saw or found is that Vasubandhu, his own teacher's explanation of the Panchaparamita Sutras was not the actual purport of those texts as such, and therefore he interpreted it from the point of view of the Madhyamaka, the middle way school. And so what this shows us is that, of course, for those who do not understand Buddhism, the whole structure of Buddhism, and
particularly Nalanda tradition.
And particularly the Nalanda tradition, they might think that Buddhism and the Nalanda tradition may be about rituals and things like that. Just taking what your teacher says and not actually trying to be critical about these teachings and have this curious, critical faculty, thinking. But that is not the case. Of course, we need taking the examples of these masters, like Vimuktisena and so forth, we need to have this critical inquiry into the teachings themselves. And of course, these masters like Vimuktisena and other disciples, Vimuktisena, for example, must have been a very devoted student of Vasubandhu himself, must have had great admiration and faith in him. But even then, he interpreted the Prajnaparamita Sutras from the Madhyamaka point of view, which is not in accordance with Vasubandhu's own philosophical view. And so we need to use our intelligence when it comes to doing inquiry into the teachings.
No, time come. So these points, if possible, think more. Then raise some question tomorrow. Welcome. Like that. Now, good night. Good sleep. Thank you. My mistake. 되게 추수도 써야지. 시부 땜부 자가 잡았네. 내가 고달려고 하다.
So His Holiness tried to actually readjust the time on, but then made a mistake here.
So now you get, I think, basic sort of system of Buddhism in general, and then particularly the Nalanda tradition, another word, Sanskrit tradition, including Tantrayana. Then also, it seems the translation from Sanskrit text, the Buddhist epistemology, mainly the Digna's text and Dharmakirti's text. Oh, really wonderful, these texts. So the epistemology is very, very helpful to create doubt, or to create, finding some contradictions. Myself, of course, I am Compendis or a good scholar. My knowledge is very limited, very, very limited. Although my teacher, when I get lesson, he kept weep, threat to me. So, in the early period, my study, out of fear, not real enthusiasm. But still, I have the name of Dalai Lama, so my teacher not that much strict. So these people, they really spent a lot of sort of hard work. So their knowledge is much better, much wider. My knowledge is very limited. However, after I study the epistemology, then it developed whenever I heard something. Immediate response is, oh, what is the reason? What is the reason? Always it developed that. So, the curiosity, of course, since my childhood, a lot of curiosity always there. But then is the epistemology, really immense help to increase the curiosity. And then, many occasions, some meetings, some scholars, some experts, when they, including scientists or thinkers, when they spoke or when they
make their presentations.
Their sort of presentation about their own sort of field, or when we listen, marvelous. Really, they have the authority in their own sort of field. But carefully listen, a little contradiction here and there. So after listen, and then sometimes with very much sort of respect way and a gentle way, I raise some of these sort of little contradictions. I raise. Then these experts, then say, oh, I have to think more. So you see, we train that way. Always, you see, try to find, try or immediately you find some contradictions. So very, very helpful. So in order to carry investigation, analytical meditation, you need that kind of mental sort of
Attitude.
Mental attitude is very essential. So I was told ancient Chinese translation, like Nagarjuna's Madhyamika Mulakarika, already there, and many sutras translation there. And then the epistemology, Dignak's writing, I heard some translated, but not all. At least in Tibetan translation, one major sort of text wrote by Dignak, that it seems not available in Chinese translation. In modern time, some experts, some scholars, I think translation. Traditionally, not available. Then Dharmakirti. Dharmakirti is altogether 3 major texts and 4 minor. So all these texts translated into Tibetan. So in Tibet, last over 1,000, I think almost 1,000 years, a number of Tibetan scholars, they also wrote a lot of sort of text about epistemology. So it is quite useful, very, very important. So those people, I often request those Tibetan Buddhist center should create as a academic center, not just carrying some ritual or something, or just as a practice of the Buddha Dharma. You see, these things are academic subject. I think Buddha's Four Noble Truths, when he first taught Four Noble Truths, 그래서 대신 먹는 데와, 저는 대신 자원을 데와, 저는 자원 제보도 자원 데와 순도가.
So during the first sermon of Buddha, he gave teaching on the Four Noble Truths repeating the Four Noble Truths 3 times. The first time he taught on the Four Noble Truths, he taught about the nature of the Four Noble Truths. identifying them. And then the second round of the teaching is about the functionality of these Four Noble Truths. And then at the third point, he taught about what are the results that you lead to by practicing based on the understanding of Four Noble Truths.
Tadi 당구디 댄싱 모는 데 봤을 때잖아요. 뭐는 이제 디제션 샤지. 선다디 패저 사이언스로 줘서 그래. 신문은 이제 숨기야래. 저 사이언스 디나네 저기 숙진 풍부한 데서 좋아. 남시기 풍부한 데 근데 임바. 다 디디 사이언스로.
So, with regard to the first round of teaching of the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha touching on the identity of the Four Noble Truths, of course, this can be taken as teaching about the reality of things, how things are on the ground level, and therefore we can take that as teaching of science. And because it deals with the ground reality, how things really are, how they exist.
This one. So that part we can consider science, about science of mind, science of particle. Then, on that basis, Buddhist concept, like a concept of impermanence, concept of the relativity and the interdependency, these concepts come. So these we can consider just subject for academy. Then third, Buddhist religion. That's for Buddhist. So I think in one time in Dharamsala in India, scientific sort of annual meeting. One scientist, he expressed, now the way you study according to Nalanda tradition, it's really, this is great because of the sharpness of mind. So he asked me, did that method can apply to normal education field? And I told, yes, certainly, that can be done. So that really, I think, is very, very helpful to get the deeper sort of understanding of all subject. And also our mind becomes sharpened and memory also increase like that. Now this text. 다 되겠어요. 창조 심 세라디 dumbanyin 창조 심 쳐도 차와 현든도 남지 돈도니에 로직라 다 남진남 창조 전부 돈도니에 로들라 창조 심.
And so, as I mentioned earlier, Bodichitta, this altruistic intention, is the mind for enlightenment is this wish or the aspiration to reach enlightenment, Buddhahood, for the benefit of all sentient beings. And so therefore you have this wish or aspiration for the great enlightenment, Buddhahood. With on the one hand, you have compassion towards other sentient beings, wishing to help others, and that in turn leads you to seek the enlightenment of Buddhahood.
Yeah. 다 전주 웃음로 장야 돼. 그 림기로 장과지. 너디 민자원이야. 제 변화한테 페이지 시징도 안데 페이지 팀이 그리고 겁나봐. 졸음셔서 그도돼. 냠번이 주셔야지. 전에와 심자 통제라 파데벨 두시 마데벨 두시 송샤지 다 마시 텐전션 상단디 공직되는 레모도가 다야 가래디 독직나네 아니 dakshanyamji lo changdan di sungkuyari. 저자다 dakshimshikuna lochaya da mangajindu dumekuna lochaya niche. Da shiwale junju dawu, eni zao gomulu zhugi changshu semdri. Daga na shingi umariji changwa. Dini na dakshimshik lochaya di sungkuduwa. Da di zao la chani shiwale junju na la da dakshimshik lochaya di be shi cawo shi sungshabchiri. 다 윤대 명한 두명고는 로장 생인데 심지어서 년도 따와다 년세가 그걸로 진셔와 삼님 되네 진수 되네 있는 대화도 된다고 참바 두명도 된다고 인지 아니 학삼 전에다 닝지디 닝지 전부 뒤에 두명을 차나 사와서 마이 두명을 자오냐면 다 학습 진행 심지들라 니지 첨부 쓰기 가다 니지들라 니지 첨부 쓰기 하래 어디도 로즘지 장니 아니 장주선 누구니 내가 로장야지 단 너도나 현주 되니 걸로 장야지 자주 되니 걸로 장야지 자주 되니 걸로 장야 될래야 내가 랑된도 장주 토론이보다 자주 되니 걸로 장야 다디 니주 걸로 장야지 대만들이야 메타메타 버리셔 랑기 장중만도 잔되걸로 누지기 뚱에도 통해 텔레 잔되걸로 숙심부심 매나 샨딩도 된저베니 뚱에 두 바자도 잡아라 내 자와자고 있는 별로지야 연구 말고 저한테 인증이야 니중 삼바디 국도가 신당 니중 삼바세야디 동의지 동의를 인정하 든줄래 야래 단 교회 동의를 인정하 무디벌래 야래 무디보이니 신에다 상동 그냠니 예대비 되게 간다이니 교회 동의를 전대걸로 용기야래 다다 금들 인중 주야게 동의 장야 쏘디 누지기 동의도 통할 거네 텔레탄대걸로 끼고 야래 누지기 동에서는 녀몽배 오한기 중에 껴와 디 풍부디 동네 코어전 풍부신 송샤하게 어다 누지 동에 라고네 는 가서 누지 동에 라고네 농들이 남직 시서서 누지 동에 라고네 는 가인다 어다 지니 동인이도 송임자 동인도 송이 서도 누지기 등의 삼등도가 서도 리들로 림지 장고요. 다데는 다심적으로 장연뒤 당신 냠바 아니 란진지기 견 고토만의 삼바 현신지기 연대 고토만의 삼바 아니 니지고 짜도 되네 람바 참배고 짜도 된다 동아 다 대장배는 학삼 니 심기 레야지
So, with regards to the how you go about with the cultivation of bodhicitta, this altruistic attitude, to become a Buddha for the benefit of sentient beings, according to the Sam Sutra, there is also mention of the 10, what are known as the 10 equalities, or and within which is mentioned the viewing all sentient beings having been equally as father and mother and so forth. And so the teaching with regards to the cultivation of bodhicitta, there are two different traditions or systems of doing that. One is called the sevenfold instruction of cause and effect, meaning that the first 6 are causes and then resulting to the result or the effect, which is bodhicitta. And so with regard to that, and then on the basis of that, for that, of course, one needs to first of all recognize other sentient beings, having been one's mother, and then reflecting or remembering, recalling their kindness, how kind they have been to oneself, and then leading on to wishing to repay their kindness, and so forth. And so this system, of course, has its source in the Panchaparamita Sutras and other sutras. And then the other system is called the exchanging and equalizing and changing self and others. And so with regard to this one, there are several texts which actually teach about this, and which are also have their sources in the teaching of the Buddha himself. And so Master Nagarjuna, for example, mentions in his Bodichitta Vivarana, the commentary on Bodichitta, and also on in his Ratnavali, the jewel garland, and about this system of, or the method of cultivating Bodichitta through equalizing and exchanging self and others. And this in turn is more elaborately explained and in the Bodhisattvacharya Avatara, the entering into the Bodhisattva way of life by Master Shantideva. And so with regard to the sevenfold instruction of cause and effect, of course, you see all sentient beings having been one's parents and relatives and so forth, and then you think about their kindness or recall their kindness, and then you wish to also to have the aspiration to repay their kindness, and then on the from there you wish, in order to repay their kindness, you cultivate compassion, loving kindness or love towards these sentient beings, which is this wish for them to have happiness and joy and happiness. And then that in turn gives rise to the called experience of compassion, and which sees or wishes others to be free from suffering. And then here, with regards to the cultivation of bodhicitta itself, you don't only wish others to be free from suffering, but you actually, what you should develop is this great compassion, which is to this attitude or the wish to take the responsibility to free the sentient beings from their suffering. And that in turn leads you to have this extraordinary resolve to take the responsibility on yourself. And then this will finally give rise to the bodhicitta. And here, of course, in order to want to liberate other sentient beings, and in order to wish or have this aspiration to reach Buddhahood for the benefit of others, what one needs is, first of all, acknowledge one's own condition. Which is to say that, if you do not acknowledge and really realize that you are in suffering, you have the suffering, all kinds of suffering, then there's no way you can actually feel compassion and empathy and all these towards others, because of not realizing your own condition. And therefore, you need to develop the renunciation. Renunciation of samsara, which means that you should develop this aspiration to free yourself from the suffering nature of samsara. And then you can turn around to others to work, to help them out of suffering and lead them to happiness. And therefore, one needs first to develop renunciation, this thought, definitely to free yourself from, to reach freedom from suffering. And then you can turn around and have compassion towards others, which is this aspiration for others to be free of suffering. And And therefore, within this suffering, of course, you need to understand there are three different types of suffering. One is, the first one is called the painful suffering, or the suffering of suffering, which is the obvious painful experiences that we know as being unwanted. And then there is the second type of suffering, which is called suffering of change. So these two types of suffering are the suffering or experiences which even the non-Buddhist practitioners wish to be out of. But when it comes to the Buddhist practice, the suffering that we are talking about primarily refers to the suffering of pervasive conditioned existence, existential suffering. And so, which is to say that this kind of life form that we are in the cycle of existence, is brought about by our afflictive emotions, these negative, destructive emotions, and the karma that through which which are created through these negative emotions. And so, as long as there is this kind of conditioning from karma and delusions, there is going to be suffering. And so, therefore, this very life, the existence itself brought about by such causes is considered as pervasive conditioning suffering. And so this is the one that you want to be out of. And therefore, once you develop this renunciation to samsara, the cycle of existence as a whole, then you can in other words, to be free from this bondage of the destructive emotions. So that is the renunciation. And for yourself, to be free from this bondage of the destructive emotions is called renunciation. And then you go on with the rest of the practice of cultivating bodhicitta. And so, in this way, you can go on with the practice of the sevenfold instruction of cause and effect, called cultivating bodhicitta, and also with regard to the equalizing, the exchanging self and others, where you actually try to gain insight into the negativities or the faults of cherishing oneself alone, and fault of cherishing, and the good positive qualities of cherishing other sentient beings. And then through that, then you develop this wish for others to have happiness, and also to want to take on the responsibility to liberate them, free them from suffering, and then that in turn leading to the extraordinary resolve to actually take the full responsibility of liberating others on your shoulder, and that one in turn leading you to have this Bodichitta.
자상가 동네에 전도 그 로야 생이디 간다 대신 남샤톤의 내용도가 런이 시대 전도니가 그 대신 남샤톤의 로트 장고요래 대신 과차가전에 연구요래 신 아니 시신지고래 전도로 영야래 대신
So from this, what we can understand is that the wish that you have to be free from this bondage of the afflictive emotions, and also the wish and the aspiration for others to be free from such conditioning. And you can understand that you have to understand the Four Noble Truths. On the basis of that, then you can have such an understanding, such a wish.
Oh, yeah, this one. Yes. Now text. Mishtinan Drishayavatri, Rinpoche, any the Chajusam Nyamshina, Ade Kunlamar Rinpoche, he born in India, in Kunu area. Then he went to Tibet and central Tibet, and also in eastern part of Tibet, Kham area. So he received teaching from many teachers. So his basic sort of stand is non-sectarian. His home village, one Komba, that's Kagyu. But once he reached Tibet, he received teaching from various sort of the teachers. So very, very non-sectarian sort of approach. Then he practiced Bodichitta very seriously, regularly. After he came to India, so he then, as a philosophy, daily meditation, analytical meditation, then he wrote one sort of sentence, right?
No, one verse.
One verse each day. So then, eventually, I think someone noticed that and then asked him, please compile.
No,
right?
no.
Compile.
Publish. Compile. No.
Compile. And publish. When I saw that, really wonderful. Then also at that time, one very famous practitioner, Kigen Tujobe, very sort of well-known scholar. At the same time, after he got sort of examination, then he went mountain area. Many years he spent on solitude, right?
No,
solitude, solo life, and very high mountain. Then in 1959, he also joined with us, escape. He found even remote area now no longer much freedom, so he come, he joined with us. So once he saw in this text, he mentioned Gendu Jabungi. Chenju Simdi, the Changsada Lubdu, the Zubet, Nimbusu Danshash Reshas.
And so the master Jeho Kyorpen Rinpoche had actually said that this text by Kono Lama Tenzin Gyaltsen Rinpoche is actually an essence which is extracted from other classical texts such as the Bodhisattva Bhumi and by Master Asanga, and also a compendium of the practices by Master Shantideva.
So he not only Buddhist sort of the philosophy or teaching, but also in Majuda Rinne Cho nga halam that Tarib Shirakabaresha. Any Manji Nyanga Shirakabare. The sorry mixeke Jana machine. But the Ganda, one of Hanig Ribian cabbage Pajadiori. Jenny Kong Yigang as Musuria, the under Zula Labra, Toma Zushe. To do Rumbuchi, Ige Sungshana and the Dendishishe, so Tarib Tatinyanga, the Zukalia Sungshana. Rumbuchi, Sunda, the Nyanga, Perjutia, some of Shunchim Sixty Tani. This is that. To the Gambamajas of Igayori. Gambamajas is the Halashusha. Haleve Cabarishas. Shung Ramjan Cabarishas. Shesungi.
And so, with regard to Master Kunlun Lama Rinpoche, Tenzin Gyatsen Rinpoche, of course, he was a great scholar in his own right, who knew all the major and minor, almost all the major and minor called classical or traditional subjects, such as Buddhist philosophy and then logic and epistemology, and then also those of the classical rhetorics of poetry and then the poetry itself. And I'm not sure about whether he studied the Tibetan medicine or not, but he was a great scholar of the five major classical learnings in his own right. And one time after we came into exile, many Tibetan scholars were gathered together to have some kind of a training, and at that time Kunlun Lama Rinpoche Tenzin Gyatsen was invited to give lectures to these scholars. And when he actually taught these subjects like poetry, for example, and he actually wrote
and
verses,
grammar, grammar,
and also Tibetan grammar. And he actually made sentences to teach grammar. He made sentences and wrote verses and so forth, which were all. These verses, the content of these verses were all about the five major subjects that the monks study in the monastic institutions, and the great classic texts written by the great masters of India and Tibet. And so one of the very great masters who was actually became later the Abbot Emeritus of Drepung Monastery, Venerable Khyentse Pema Gyaltsen Rinpoche, he was quite astonished at the knowledge, the depth and the vastness of the knowledge of Kunlun Lama Rinpoche by seeing all those sentences and the verses that he wrote during his lectures.
Since he sort of implement what he learned very seriously. So his daily sort of practice is Bodichitta, altruism. And sort of some kind of indication, his inner sort of experience when we met him, something there. So recently I met one of my American scientists, the Harvard educated. So when he about finishing this university, so the Harvard University,
PhD degree,
PhD or I don't know. You see, and he visited India. The attraction towards Buddhism was, in his case, he met Kunlun Lama Rinpoche, I think in Sarnath. As soon as he met that person, looks like beggar, and very, very peaceful, very humble. When I received this teaching, his own something like almost hermit in Varanasi city, one Hindu ashram. On the top, one small sort of building, small house there. So he remained there. And his companion was actually pitching. A lot of pitching there. So he stayed there, he lived there. So then he told me, this is the Hindu one sort of ashram. So he mentioned, this is Tibet, Tingis, Chisangasa. Solitude of Chungis. You got the Nangbel Hagan to Tevinum, young Kurang, because of the Mijin Mangu, Yonde Gorba, that the Hindu Lagan or Kanachi do, Shushu, in the Yaushu to Sisungi. I received oral transmission in that place, in that room. I still remember. a very humble teacher, had a very humble house. And while I receiving this teaching, much moved, wonderful. So, that in that one. 다니 산제 대치 중남라 미지바의 대배다. 띄우선 조심만 봐. 키스. 다 되게 처식 처들에도가. 이제 그런 일이 삼바시레마도 슝지디마 슝직부게 가서 그래. 좀 시네. 삼바게 말이. 다이네고 막 듣기는 전에 처식 차셔.
And so the first verse is like a salutation, verse of salutation. And in fact, of course, the Kundalama Lama Tenzin Gyaltsab Rinpoche didn't mean to publish a book by writing these verses, one verse each day, but he actually meant it for his own practice and so forth. And therefore, this, but in any case, when it was published, of course, this verse has become the verse of salutation.
네 근데도 미치버스야 줄여야 돼 undivided faith가
now
미치버스 줄왜 미치버스도 줄도 매봐 undivided 아이나 가 미치버스도 템보 세시버지마도 undivided faith 그거 아이나 undivided faith 로진이 있어서 고쳐도 로진이 매봐 간들잖아
So the translation for the Tibetan term "miche pai theba" here is translated as undivided faith. Perhaps I mean what
unflinching faith, unflinching.
Yes. Yes. So perhaps the term should be unflinching faith. And it has this connotation of being very stable and firm faith.
Janita, now here you have to know what is Buddha, what is Dharma, what is Sangha, or follower, mainly Sangha. So quite often, when I met some Buddhists, say, what is your religion? Then they say, Buddhism. Then I ask, what is Buddhism? And then in many cases they say, refuge to Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Then further question, what is Buddha? What is Dharma? Then no answer. I don't know. Many cases you see that. So unless we know Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, it's something really worthwhile to Kasoda refuge. No. And how can sincere sort of refuge?
No, taking refuge.
Oh. In order to, for example, in order to take medicine, unless you see you know the medicine how it work, so all the ingredients and then something definite. Otherwise, just the name of medicine, then just take impossible. So similarly, Dharma, unless you know the system, how it works, how will bring benefit, how will bring peace of mind, not just a faith, but sort of systematic sort of effect that way. So therefore, I often telling people, Buddhist, we should be 21st century Buddhist. That means full of knowledge about Buddhism, about Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Then develop enthusiasm, follow that teaching. Otherwise, oh, my father, my family, Buddhist, so I am Buddhist. Or someone told me Buddhism is very good, so I follow. Nonsense. So we must, as the Buddha say, you are your own master. So, or self-master. So we must investigate whether that is really worthwhile or reliable or not. That only through investigation. That's very important. So with fuller knowledge about Buddha Dharma, then follow Buddha Dharma, become 21st century Buddhist. I think very, very important. In that respect, those Nalanda masters are immense help to understand the whole system of Buddha Dharma, which I briefly sort of explained this morning and afternoon as well. I just 가서 그 콘주 셰셔디 등에 데브로 담배 소시르마도 정말 제주 가게야 말이야.
So what I actually tell the audience is all like, actually playing out a tape recorder, the recordings which I have actually done, which came from the teachings of the Nalanda masters. I'm just playing it out to you.
And of course, I follow the Nalanda tradition, remain a little skeptical. Now, for example, Abhidhamma Koshakarika mentioned about the world. Now with deep respect, Bosmant, I sort of express, I don't agree. Sometimes I jokingly telling Bosmant when he wrote Abhidhamma Koshakarika, must be his age, quite old. I think anthropologically his eyesight also not very good. So he look when cloudy day and look sun, and night full moon. So he noticed slight differences. 제자가 박사 ngö주 찍다 제스. 다와디 박사 ngö주, 니모디 박사 ngö주 ngö지, 박사 시모도 캐면다가. 산타데 공장 사람한테도 쓰잖아. 박사 찍 캐와요서 래 공는 디접저리 사마다 다 데리게서 뭐냐 전에 텔레스코프 인 mathematics 도슨 계시는데. 나와도 니모도 쉬우지기 중요하고. And then also the Abhidhamma Koshakarika mentioned Nindal Lumbu channels. Lumbu channels, Lumbu Rinji, Shi Rinji, Chui Nandu, Gedita, Nobu Tishi, Tengdo Ya, Bazadani, Gedu, So Yundu, Baza Shidi Samla, Nimada Anjalo, Dando de Oro. Temenji Gorota. That day, as the Rikas Senri, Shimju Mus, Shening, that did it. 나보고 다니 버려. 땅에 앉아 따다듬는데 매일 그저래 친분 라지래. 그래. 니모도 밀린 시내 저리다. 쉬우시도 와. 밀린 그저래 찍으래. 쉬우지래. 겨와도 와. 저장가 사치로 어시대 땡. Still I hope I'm Buddhist. I do not sort of accept some of these sort of description. I believe the scientific sort of finding is more reliable. They truly sort of analyze everything, very detailed way. 다이네 science 톤에 많이 받아 매버니 받아 백화가다야. 지지 야마레스. 이 사이언티스트 이지시가 말씀을 이나 잡아먹 중래. 이 망해면 된지. 그 매니 많이 있남 여장 안된 님부터 붙이기. 인터넷 안돼 절대 말아. 그냥 안 한다 들어봤는데 니들 니즈만 굳이 로자다 거는 식매봐. 디디 마시버서 매버시버 말봐.
So many of the things that are mentioned in classical texts, such as Vasubandhu's Abhidhammakosha Karika, where it mentions that the the sides of the moon and the sun, regarding that, there's only one yojana difference between the sides, and where moon is said to be of 50 yojanas or leagues, sun is said to be of 51 leagues. So that kind of measurements is given. And of course, if you look at the moon and the sun today through these scientifically developed instruments, the powerful telescopes, it's very clear that these are not the real sizes of the sun and the moon. And therefore, we cannot accept literally what is given in Abhidhammakosha. And these scientific findings are also done, on the one hand, through telescopes and so forth, and also mathematical calculations as well. And,
few years ago, one Tibetan settlement in India, so they opened one
exhibition.
Exhibition.
In a primary school.
They opened. Then they asked me I should visit, and I visited. So it's outside their classroom. You see, they make some kind of
exhibition
of sort of science, in quite a simple way. And then you see one sort of symbol, sort of say
models.
Models. Sun and moon between the earth, so eclipse. So they demonstrated. And one very young Tibetan girl, one student. So I think older, perhaps around 10 years old, very young. She seriously told me, Tibetans believe the eclipse is something deity, eat, like that. So that small girl telling me that's wrong. Then, of course, I know these things, but then I carefully, look at her, something wonderful. Then she explain, eclipse come this way, like that. So we must be scientific-minded Buddhist. Very important. The money was the memory.
Yes. And so we have to be able to different. On the one hand.
And then one time, I think in Germany, one sort of meeting with media people. One media asked me, now scientific research already proved there is no next life. And I respond, that's not very certain. Nowadays, actually, if scientists, through their research, something prove, something exists through proof, then we must accept that. However, there's certain things not yet proved by scientific research. That does not mean that whether does not exist or simply not find. So make big differences. So like rebirth, next life. That's beyond scientific means to research. Very difficult, isn't it? I think topmost scientists cannot read your mind. Only roughly the picture or through wire your brain. Now you have some emotions now develop. Roughly they can say. 100% very difficult. Isn't it? Like that.
So the point that I'm making is, even through science, I mean, the scientists may claim to have found such and then they may also say that such and such things are like this and that. And what we need to understand is there is big difference between actually finding something to be non-existent and not being able to find something. So these are called two different things. And so in other words, what we can say is that absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence as such. And so there may be some instances where the scientists may be not able to find that is something. But then, could that be because the thing doesn't exist at all, or could they be because the science has not yet been able to find that? So these are the questions that we must raise.
Recently, I was Portland. They set one some kind of Buddhist college or something. So at the opening ceremony, they invited me, and one scholar. I know that scholar, quite good scholar. Now, he mentioned, now in the West, in Western world, Buddhist population, 1%. But person who accept rebirth, 25%. Recently, we have one sort of big meeting in South India, in one big monastery, the monk student around 5,000. So one annual scientific sort of meeting or dialogue took place there. So one scientist, a very well-known scientist, he mentioned he not Buddhist, but he believed rebirth. He feel it is quite realistic, rebirth. Then he mentioned, there's a little bit of emotion. He mentioned his next life. Again, he wished working with Dalai Lama. Like that. So these things, you see, those unbiased, sort of scientific-minded, investigate. Then the things, most probability. Then you see they, could be. So these unbiased, genuine scientists, their mind is open mind. Wonderful, really wonderful. Now second verse. 탐브리시반 다와의 차셔서고 내중 좀 전에 라마디 신의 체면 셴이 미니서 다들이한테 잠주 좀 숨으리.
So the second verse actually gives the reason for taking refuge or seeking refuge in the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha.
강도 송례 중앙이 2020 노블라 셴딜레셔 땅에 친분 점으로서 갈았어. 다들 송기한테 송기.
So we stop at verse number 3, which says, how could trinkets of others apparently fine explanations ever compete with the words of the one whose meaning is like a wish-fulfilling gem?
Now it seems, I think, 3:30. 3:30. Not my mistake. So, thank you. See you again tomorrow. And think more in these points which we already discussed, and some gyawandida tamche rodo ngo dusunje be gyawa tam ngo gana chodo nga ba de dage gewe zawandi sambu chöje rodo ngo ki. Thank you.